Let's switch the argument over and look at what else a young Earth would imply. A vast majority of scientists think that they have cast iron evidence that the Earth is almost 1,000,000 times older than young Earth creationists believe it to be. That's a pretty huge difference. But let's suppose that those scientists are wrong. How could that be the case? Well, one of the following must be true of pretty much all of the millions of scientists alive today. 1. Maybe all of them are stupid. They just don't understand the problem. A problem that's apparently so straightforward that creationist debaters can pick holes in it in just a few seconds to a crowd of non-experts. This doesn't sound too plausible to me. 2. Maybe then they're just ignorant. Maybe scientists haven't heard any of the creationist arguments, and if they did, then they would immediately be swayed. Well, there's a few issues with this too. Firstly, I know lots of scientists who spend time dissecting creationist arguments, and know pretty much all of them. Secondly, the creationist arguments are completely different to the scientific viewpoint. The claim of ignorance might explain why scientists haven't changed to a different theory, but it doesn't explain why they now believe something that's almost completely the opposite. So what's next? Mass delusion? Maybe scientists are all deluded into thinking that the evidence they collect tells something that is completely the opposite of the truth. It's difficult to understand how this could be true. Scientific methods are necessarily open and transparent, and anyone is welcome to criticise any conclusions they make. It's very well saying that millions of people have a collective delusion. In that case, put forward an explanation of how their deductions are wrong. As I said, science aims to remove human biases from the process as much as possible, so deductions from evidence should be a matter of fact, not opinion. 4. Finally, maybe science is just one big conspiracy. This seems to be a common claim, and I'll deal with it on the next slide. I honestly can't think of any other options. If the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, then at least one of the above must be true. Conspiracy claims are rife throughout pseudoscientific and anti-scientific theories. One quick and relatively simple way to cast doubt on your opponent in a debate is to imply that they only hold their beliefs for some undisclosed underhand reasons. Let's look at a few genuine reasons why Kent Hovind, in his presentations, thinks scientists believe in evolution. 1. They think that if everyone believes evolution, it will become true. 2. They must teach the lie to keep the paycheck coming in. 3. They understand the bigger picture of how evolution is the foundation for the New World Order. 4. That is all they've been taught. 5. They hope there is no God to answer to. And 6. Just plain old pride. Does he honestly believe that any of these is a good enough reason to keep millions of people all simultaneously propagating something they know to be a lie? The bottom line is that conspiracies simply don't exist. It's just not possible for them to exist. They require the complete, coordinated, unwavering and selfless devotion of every single person involved for their entire lives, with nothing obviously to gain from doing this, and everything to gain from exposing the conspiracy. And still, after all this, we haven't addressed the point that scientific deductions aren't made in secret meetings behind closed doors. All scientific reasoning is published openly in papers, which can be read by anyone. So maybe there is a huge conspiracy, but it would be totally irrelevant. You still need to point out where the science is actually wrong. Where have these mysterious clandestine organisations manipulated the scientific conclusions? And can creationists demonstrate results consistent with their claims in controlled conditions, free from nefarious interfering forces? But what if there really were huge flaws in the theory of evolution? What if it were a big conspiracy that was all based on a lie? Well, we've already seen that a substantial chunk of many different sciences would need to be rewritten. But what else would happen? Are there any incentives for the person who finally disproves evolution? Well, yes, there would be loads. For a start, a huge amount of money would flood into science to research all the implications of such a radical paradigm shift. There would be more jobs, interest and excitement. The discoverer would certainly get at least the Nobel Prize, probably a lot more. They would be set to be more famous than Einstein. And they would certainly become extremely wealthy from the books, the speaking engagements and the prizes. The Nobel Prize alone is well over $1 million. So there's an enormous incentive set up for anyone to disprove the theory of evolution. There are millions of new science graduates every year looking for a way into an increasingly tough research job market. And plenty of established researchers looking for the huge discovery that will grant them a permanent academic post. And the creationists are telling us that there are flaws in the theory of evolution that are so simple that anyone can understand them. And yet this extraordinary theory still rests at the very heart of biological science, without any serious objections in over a century and a half. With such incredible incentives in place, and nobody claiming them, there can only be one conclusion. Evolution is wholly, undeniably true. If it were any other way, then the system is set up to topple it from its perch in the blink of an eye. We're nearly done for this presentation. I just wanted to look at a few guidelines for debating creationists that should be helpful. We've already looked at the question of what is science, so you should be familiar with that, but what about the rest? Anomaly finding. The majority of creationist arguments revolve around anomaly finding. They look for tiny parts of scientific theory that look vulnerable to intuitive argument, and they go for it. It's like trying to claim that a woven strand of 1,000,000 hairs must be weak because each one is individually incapable of holding a substantial weight. But here's the point about science. All of science works together to support the whole. The reason why anomaly finding is so powerful is because it takes the audience's focus away from the big picture. Your job is to ensure that they refocus on the big picture and don't get bogged down in details. What creationists are proposing is preposterous to the extent of severe delusion. And keeping the eyes of your audience on this simple truth is where you should focus your energy. Only spend time rebutting a select few of the most high-profile creationist claims, but do it very thoroughly. The aim here being to throw massive doubt on the plausibility of all their theories and on the honesty of the person proposing them. Be realistic. It takes about 10 seconds to make an unfounded claim or to throw a whole load of propaganda at a scientific result. However, it will probably take 10 or 100 times longer than this to show why the creationist theory is wrong. You can never answer all the questions they bring up, so don't try to, because you'll just give unconvincing answers to a handful of their points, and you'll come across very weakly. Make sure that people have the big picture instead, and encourage them to investigate things for themselves from both sides of the debate and with an open mind. Honesty. Please don't lie. Leave that to your opponents. If you don't know something, then admit it, but rest assured that someone somewhere will know the answer. Suggest that the audience go and look up the actual answer when they get back home. Honesty and integrity are powerful weapons. If you come across as a decent human being, then people are much more likely to take notice of what you say than if, for example, you're a convicted tax evader, mentioning no names. Be prepared for creationists to lie. In the high-profile 2005 trial in Dover, Pennsylvania, the creationist defendants were caught lying under oath on several occasions, as well as being generally dishonest and misleading. Do not be like them. As a scientist, you should be above such duplicity. Gaps in knowledge. There are lots of things that science doesn't know or understand. Some of these look totally insurmountable, as do most similar problems until they're eventually solved. Be honest about that, but make sure that the audience doesn't think that these gaps are in any way a failing of science. No, we haven't got a solution yet, but it's ridiculous to claim that anything we don't currently understand is therefore a failing of all of science. It's equally idiotic to claim that if science is unable to explain something, then the only other possibility is a divine creator. Creationism doesn't solve any of the problems. Science explains how complexity arises in the universe. Creationism does not, because it states as its main principle the existence of a creator who is necessarily more complex than the universe he created. This is always worth pointing out whenever anyone says that science can't explain absolutely everything. Creationism not only fails to provide any evidence for its claims, but it poses lots of new problems that we have no answer to whatsoever, and which seem to be against all of modern science. Charisma. 90% of winning a debate goes on charisma. Make sure you can make people laugh. Never ever just read from the slides. Smile and engage people in a friendly manner. It's really important that you follow this advice, because such a huge part of whether or not people listen to what you say is balanced on whether they like you. That goes for your clothes too. Please don't dress like a nerd even if you are one. Insults. I would never expect to lecture to creationists in the same way that I would talk to open-minded scientists. A truly terrible way to convince anyone is to try to force them to accept something against their will. 90% of all creationists will never change their mind whatever you say, no matter how intelligent and convincing your arguments may be, and no matter how funny your jokes. The only hope you have is to do what you can with the remaining 10%, who are at least open to other ideas. You're starting off at a huge disadvantage, because they will have an enormous amount of emotional capital invested in creationism, so the only way to help them accept the reality is to show them not only that science is unquestionably true, but also that accepting it is a decent and honest thing to do. The best way to show that is to be a good human being, whilst also being assertive and forceful when required. In short, be likeable. Anger. It's really difficult to listen to the emotive arguments of somebody who passionately hates and disagrees with everything that you hold dear. Though bear in mind that the creationists probably feel the same way about you. It's understandable that you can get annoyed when an opponent stands up in front of an audience and blatantly lies to them. Please don't enter public debates if you think this will be a problem, because you absolutely must remain 100% calm throughout. If not, then you've already lost. Be open-minded. You're not always right. Deal with it. It's important not to be massively arrogant and assume that science has all the answers and that no creationist arguments even have a shred of truth. Sometimes the creationists unearth something of a genuine problem. Sometimes they put forward real scientific studies which pose difficult questions to science. Be ready to accept that and acknowledge that sometimes you have to go away and evaluate the evidence. Don't ever try to answer a question with a brush-off answer when you don't know anything about it. Insist that you read the study carefully first before you comment on a specific result. Remember, most importantly, one study that seems to disagree with the overwhelming consensus is hardly a problem. After all, the rest of our knowledge meshes together very nicely. What's probably the case is either A, the study is flawed, or B, a new phenomenon has been discovered that needs to be folded into what we already know. Define everything. Creationists often try to wriggle out of flaws in their theories by using cleverly ambiguous terminology. One of the most obvious uses of this is the word kind, which they use to mean a type of animal or plant, but it's never defined with any rigour, which allows them to escape careful cross-examination on this point. When they define a term in their own words, then it ceases to be a question of argument whether or not certain things fall under each definition. It's just a question of comparing terms. For example, often they claim that evolution is a religion, but the definition for religion that they need to come up with to support this is usually so vague that it would also encompass things like vegetarianism or supporting a certain football team. If you get them to define their terms, then you'll find a lot of their arguments crumble very quickly. It's not about winning. Before you enter any creationist debate, accept up front that you will definitely lose. The audience will probably be around 90% hostile, and very few of them will be open to changing their mind. All you can hope to do is to plant a few seeds of intrigue and doubt into the minds of those attending, and hope that they begin to look things up for themselves and discover how they have been misled. You should aim to give a good impression of science. If you come across as bitter, nerdy and humourless, then nobody will accept what you say, because apart from anything else, they won't want to associate themselves with you. Remember, they're looking for evidence to support the view that all scientists are cold, heartless conspirators who are trying to bring about a new world order. Don't give them any, or you're doing yourself and all of science a profound disservice. So this is a final slide. Remember the key points that I've made here about how science is an empirical or evidence-based process which is used by scientists from many different areas to investigate how the universe really works. It's set up to minimise sources of error so that we can understand how much confidence we can have in our answers. And importantly, it requires openness. Science is not, never has been, and never could be a matter of opinion. You've also learned about the implications of what would have to be true if creationism were true, and you've seen that it requires a lot of truly absurd conclusions. You've learned my law of conspiracies, that all conspiracies are wrong, period, without exception. It's just not possible for such a situation to occur. Finally, the number one way to silence a creationist is simply not to have a debate in the first place. Science is not decided by public debate, it's based on patient observation, theoretical analysis and peer review. If creationists want to present an argument, then let them do it in the peer-reviewed scientific press, like everyone else. If they're trying to draw you into a public debate, then the chances are they'll have a very slick presentation, they will have practiced it many times, they will pack the audience with people sympathetic to their cause, and consequently very hostile to yours, and they will definitely know how to make science look very stupid by using basic propaganda techniques and, frankly, by lying through their teeth. Science just doesn't work like that. As ever, there's loads more information on my website at frame.net, where you can also find a transcript of this talk and all the following ones, and you can keep up to date with my blog as well as learning about some of my other work. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to next time.